Video on making some simple meatballs. It's that time of year when I make bacon for Christmas presents, so I buy whole pork bellies, and there's the flappy bit at the end of the pork belly, which isn't really suitable for bacon. In the past, what I've done is I've just turned it all into bacon, and then kind of done something with that bacon. But this year I decided that I'd cut off the flappy bit and I would mince it, and I would make some meatballs, and I put them in some jars. I'm going to use these jars, and then I'm going to cook it into like my homemade tomato sauce and put it in these jars. So these jars are going to kind of dictate what size the meatballs are. So we'll make the meatballs, fry the meatballs, cook them in the tomato sauce, and then we'll jar them up, and then we'll preserve them in the jars, and then they might get given out as gifts, or they'll sit in my cupboard ready for when I'm wanting something to eat. So I've taken off a lot of the fat from the flappy bit of pork and the offcuts of the pork, so it's a little bit fatty, but that's fine. That'll just mean the meatballs are nice and juicy. So just minced up the spare pork. There's about 2 kilos of pork. There's 300 grams of chopped onions, finely chopped onions. The garlic was a little bit past its best, so there's about 4 garlic cloves there that I've just minced, and also it was starting to sprout as well, was the was the garlic. So I've put in the sprouts as well, and we've got some thyme, a couple of teaspoons worth of thyme from the garden, and I have also put pepper in as well. I'm not going to season. We'll season once it starts cooking. I'm not going to season the meatballs. I'll season the sauce around the meatballs once it started cooking, and then we can see what kind of if it needs any more salt. But pork, I generally don't find that pork needs too much salt, and the jars of pasta sauce, tomato sauce, there's always a little bit of seasoning in there anyway, so we'll adjust as always. Very easy to add a little bit more salt, very difficult to get rid of it. So there's a million recipe for meatballs. This is just a simple one. If you want, you can just use sausage meat. Buy sausages, pull them out of skins, and then use that meat if you want to make sausage. If you want to make simple meatballs, there's varying ratios as well, and there's varying ratios of beef to pork, or veal to pork, or veal to beef. There's all kinds of different ratios, but this is just 100% pork belly with quite a lot of fat removed, but there's still a little bit of fat in there. So the secret with this is we're going to have to really scrunch all the meat together, so it all starts to bind and mix. So you kind of activating the proteins in the meat so they all stick together. I'm not going to put any breadcrumb in because I haven't got any. Oh, that's quite a common thing to do in the UK, certainly with sausages and things, that you add a breadcrumb. That's mostly down to the fact of bulking dishes out. They don't tend to do that in the rest of Europe. Well, are we still in Europe? I don't know. Technically, ish maybe. So I'm going to push it all together, and then it all sticks together, and it's gonna cook for a long time. So that will make sure that the meatballs stick together rather than just cooking into the sauce and creating a ragu. Although you could do that if you wanted. You could just turn it into a pork ragu, which would be just as nice. But we're going to do meatballs for a change. So it's nice and garlicky. There's about 4 cloves of garlic, and then we're going to make the meatballs about. Let's have a look at the jar. Yeah, we're going to make them about the size of a ping pong ball. It's about the size of a ping pong ball. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll form them all together, and then I'll stop the video. You don't need to see me forming them all together, but it's just a simple case of rolling together like that, and then we'll fry them off. We'll come back and we'll fry them off, and we'll give them a bit of colour. I don't necessarily always think you have to give them a bit of colour, but it's just going to improve flavour. You could just drop them in the sauce like that and cook them, and they would be just as nice. But we're going to fry them, give them a bit of colour, and they'll just feel just that little bit more nicer. So pause the video, and then we'll come back once I've formed all the meatballs. We'll see how many we've got, and then we'll fry them off in batches. Right. What I will add is that it can get a bit sticky tin of meatballs, so it's just a good idea to have a bowl of water nearby. Then you can you keep your hands wet, and then the meatballs won't stick to your hands. And also, once you've decided on what size of meatball you want, so that's my size of meatball, keep that to one side and use that as a guide to how big the rest of the meatballs are. Because what can happen is the meatballs can get an ununiform size, so they can start getting smaller and they can start getting bigger. So once you've decided on your ball size, keep that one to one side and then use that as the guide. Don't use like the last one you made as the guide to the next one, because slowly what will happen over time is they'll get bigger or they'll get smaller. That's obviously getting bigger and that's obviously getting smaller, but that's what happens. So you keep the first one to as your reference to what size they're going to be. That is today's top tip. So that one wants to be a bit smaller, and then you can get the idea that they're roughly the same size, but they're not going to get too big or too small, which isn't a problem if they start getting too big or too small. But I want them all to be a uniform size, because I'm going to put them, they're going to fit in jars. So that's today's top tip. Right, so just steady the camera. Right, so they are now, the meatballs are frying. I made about 55 meatballs from 2 kilos of mince, which is quite a lot more than I thought actually, and hopefully I'm going to have enough jars to do it all. So I'm frying them in some the spare fat that I've cut off the pork bellies from this amount of mince, and from making the bacons I've rendered, and I'm using that. You can see it. So I rendered it yesterday. I've made some videos on rendering fat. It's pretty straightforward. So I rendered that fat, then minced it, and then rendered it down. I'm using that fat to fry the meatballs. I just don't like waste, and I think also it's that lard that I made is full of flavour. So I didn't want to waste it. I didn't want to throw it away, and I'm not scared of using fats like that. Certainly when it's free, and it just makes things taste so much better than using oil. And the oils that you buy are just a little bit sceptical about them. So I'll turn that down a bit, it's like spit. So give them a nice bit of colour. Turn them over. I'm not bothered if they're uniformly coloured all over. I just want a bit of colour on the outside, which will give them a bit better flavour, and it also help them hold together. And because I've made a lot more meatballs than I actually thought, I'm slightly concerned I haven't got just enough tomato sauce. So I'm either going to add a few tins of chopped tomatoes to the sauce, or just to make up the liquid, because it will reduce down over time with the tomato sauce, and it's already quite reduced and quite thick. I think what I might do is, when I've rendered the fat down, there's some stock underneath, like a ham stock, well a bacon stock. No, not a bacon stock, a pork stock underneath. It's quite gelatinous, got a little bit of flavour to it. So I might use that just to bulk out the tomato sauce, because I don't like waste. So do it in batches, fry things off in batches, not too many in the pan, because what happens is it cools the pan down too much and things start to stew rather than fry. And it's also, it's quite a heavy pan, is this one, so it takes a long time to heat up, so you kind of just got to judge when it's at a good temperature. But that's at a good temperature now. So it's the main burner, and it's on low, but it's a heavy frying pan. So those will be fine. So we'll do them in batches. Batches of what? There's about 20 there, 18, I guess. Yeah, 18 or 20 in batches. So they're like 3 or 4 batches that I do, and then we'll come back and we'll decide how we're going to cook them. If I had less meatballs than I've got, what I would potentially do was I would cook them on top of the stove in this pan. So I would take the meatballs out, drain off the excess fat, add the tomato sauce, add the meatballs back, cover it with a lid or some foil or a plate, something along those lines, and I would cook it slowly on top of the stove, and then I would get all the caramelised juices from the bottom of the pan cooking into the sauce as well. But I think because I've got quite a lot of these meatballs, I'm going to slowly braise them in the oven and do it that way. Can't really do that in a pan, because you don't want them sitting on top of each other, because what's that going to do is when you try and stir it, you're going to break them up. Whereas if they're in a single layer, you can see how they're cooking, and you're not going to break them up by stirring them. You're just going to stay together in one place. Hopefully, I don't often make meatballs, so as always, I'm winging it using the knowledge which I have. So we'll cook them in batches, and then we'll come back, and I think I'll cook them in an oven tray, in 2 oven trays, in the oven covered in sauce, and I'll decide how much pasta sauce I get, because I don't really want to use it all up in this one dish and then have to make some more sauce next week. So we'll kind of judge how we go. Right, so all the meatballs are now fried off, and I've drained them just to get rid of the excess fat. Normally I kind of like fat in things, but too much fat can make things a little bit greasy. So I just drain the meatballs in the metal colander, just get rid of the excess fat. And it also, and then I've collected that fat, and you'll see the fat here. I will use that fat for something else because it's still good. It's got loads, even more flavour in it now, but there are some meat juices at the bottom of that fat. So I want those meat juices, so which I'm going to add back to the meatballs. So we'll just use a spoon, take off as much of that fat as possible, which you may think is a little bit of a faff, but any kind of flavour that you can add to something makes the difference, and that's generally the difference between home cooking and professional cooking, is they know how to make things and to utilise everything. So we'll just get most of that fat off. A few meat juices coming out there. There is going to be quite a bit of fat that comes out of these meatballs, so I'm going to have to scrape the fat off anyway as it's cooking. So those meat juices can go in, which is all flavour, and then that fat will get saved and used somewhere else. So let's see how much 50 odd meatballs needs covering in sauce. So this is a 600 milliliter jar, so it's certainly going to need that. I think we'll need about 1.5 litres worth of sauce. So that I have got some onions which I want to use up as well, so they're going to go in and get cooked as well. And I've got a part container of sauce as well, and I'll put them in last. So there's a part container of sauce which I used the other day. So I reckon that's about 200 millilitres, maybe 3. And also, what I'm going to do to speed up the cooking process, I'm going to put a bit of heat underneath this. It's a metal tray, so it's all right being put on the gas. And what that will do, it's quicker to heat things up on top of the stove than it is in the oven. The general rule is you can cook something on top of the stove in half the time that you can cook it in the oven. So if casseroles go in the oven, stews are on top of the stove. So if a casserole in the oven takes 4 hours to cook, you can cook it on top of the stove in 2 hours. Just a little bit of information there. I don't know why that is. I think it's probably because of direct heat. So whereas you're getting direct heat from the top of the stove, and you're getting is it ambient heat? I forget. It's a long time since I went to college, but we did learn about all that kind of stuff. I think maybe another one, because I'm going to have sauce to cover the meatballs in once I start preserving them in jars. So I want plenty of sauce. I think what we'll do, so we'll use that much. So what's that? That's yeah. So it's about 1.5 litres worth of sauce. You could just use good quality tin tomatoes or cheap quality tin tomatoes if you wanted, but because I've got the pasta sauce and it's got loads of onions and flavour in there, it's just going to be nicer. That's that. And then with onions that we had from the other day, they can go on and they will cook down to absolutely nothing. It's going to be in the oven for at least 2 hours, possibly more. So onions there. Don't need any herbs in or anything like that because we've got them in the meatballs, or garlic or onions, because that's all in the sauce already. So we are good to go. Just by putting it on top of the stove and getting it up to temperature, we'll give it a little bit of a shake. Make sure nothing's sticking on the bottom, because no one likes a sticky bottom. Yeah, that's all moving. So what we'll do, we can just get it up to a quicker temperature. If you put that straight in the oven, it's going to take a while before it gets up to a good temperature to start cooking the meatballs. Whereas if we heat it up on top of the stove for 10 minutes, we'll save maybe an hour's worth of cooking time, because we're going to cook it about one 150. I'm not particularly bothered. I'm not in any rush. I'm not going anywhere tonight, so it can stay in the oven for as long as it wants. I'll have got some bread to cook later on, but that's not a problem. It's only getting on late afternoon, mid to late afternoon at the moment, so it can quite happily sit in the oven until 8 o'clock tonight. Not a problem. It's not as if I'm going out. It's not as if anyone's going out at the moment. So it'll just bring up the temperature just that little bit quicker. Just got to be careful. I'd advise, yeah, metal's your best bet if you're going to be heating things up on top of the stove like this, or like a cast ironware, like a Cruiser, or cheaper versions are available. But things like enamel tins, I'd just be a little bit cautious about, because what you can do is you can wreck the enamel, or pot ones as well. You just need to make sure that they are suitable for use on top of the stove. That's why I'm using this metal one. It's also a decent size, although saying that, it probably won't fit in the oven now, but it'll be fine. So bring it up to temperature. I'm going to put some foil on top, although I have got a tray that fits on top of that. I think I'll save the foil and I'll put a tray on top of that, and it'll go in the oven 150 for at least 2 hours once it's all bubbling like that all over. We'll just move it around a bit, and then we'll taste the meatball, chef's little treat, and then we'll just keep cooking until they're all nice and tender and falling to bits, and then we'll jar up probably tomorrow, and put them in sterilised jars, and then just recook them in the jar. Slowly bring those jars up to temperature in simmering water, and then that'll just preserve them for months and months and months and months and months. But that's it for the moment. So we'll just wait until that comes up to a better temperature, and then it'll go in the oven. I need to switch the oven on. But that's fine. I think that's it. I think that's it for the moment. I can't think there's anything else. I think what I'll do, obviously some of this liquid will evaporate off. So what I think I'll do is, instead of if it starts getting a little bit drier, what I will do is I'll add some of the pork stock from underneath the rendered fat, and then use that instead of water to kind of let it down a bit and not let it go too thick or too concentrated. I think that'd be a good idea. And I'll also, there's also some bits of pasta sauce, tomato sauce left in the jars. So I think what I'll do is I'll just rinse them out with a bit of water, and then we're not wasting any sauce, and I'll also get a bit more liquid in that pan. And I think that's it for the moment. Yeah, I think that's it. I can't think of anything more to say. I've always got more to say, but not on cooking. And that's it for the moment. Actually, I will add, if you wanted to, you can cook. Don't be limited in your ways of thinking about cooking things. If you wanted, you could, because there's a metal tray, if I wanted, maybe if you wanted as well, you could carry on cooking on top of the stove like this. Don't just think that pans for the top of the stove. You could certainly put this on a low heat, covered, and you'll be able to cook that on top of the stove instead of using a pan. So if you are certainly coming up to holidays and cooking bigger quantities of food, well, that's if we're allowed to have friends and family around this year. When we get through this, which we will, talking about the pandemic, I don't know if anyone will ever watch this and when you will watch it, but we're going through a pandemic at the moment, and it's a bit, to be honest. But cooking for bigger numbers, don't be limited, just think outside the box. So when oven space and cooker tops and things like that, you don't need to cook things in the oven. Sometimes you can cook them on the top, and this on a low heat on the back of the stove, it doesn't take up that much room. Whereas if that would take up, if you wanted to cook a lot of things in one day, you can actually cook this on top of the stove. And then if I wanted to, if I was desperate to cook my bread that I'm baking for my sister, I could have the bread cooking in the oven and this on top of the stove, rather than having to wait for this to be cooked for me then to cook the bread, or cook the bread and then put this in the oven. So just kind of think outside the box. That is, it's fine. Just because it's an oven tray doesn't mean that it has to be used in the oven. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And the same with pans as well. When you buy pans, make sure that you buy pans that have got metal handles that you can put in the oven. Plastic handles would obviously melt, but when you're buying pans, make sure they've got metal handles, and then you can use them actually as cooking vessels in the oven as well. So that's another bit of a tip, and the way I look at things when I'm buying bits of equipment. And you kind of, if you can buy one bit of equipment instead of buying two, and bits of equipment are versatile. and can be used for different things, that's a really good thing that you should be looking out for when you buy things. So, like metal trays, you can use them on the top, or you can use them in the oven. Pans with metal lids. I'm waffling. I'll stop. But that's it for the moment. Just a little bit of a carry on from that one. So this is just a baking tray, but it also happens to fit on top of this oven tray like a lid, which is a really useful thing. So you've kind of got a container that you can put in the oven that's also got a lid. Hopefully it'll fit in the oven, I'm sure it does. But fine. But now I can use that as a lid rather than having to use a bit of foil. And also, because it's a proper lid, if I was doing multiple things in the oven that were all cooking at the same time, I could then put something on top of that. So if I wanted to, wanted to heat something up, I could just use that as another tray as well. So that just utilises a little bit more oven space. So that's it, I'm sure, for now. Right, so meatballs have been in for about 3 hours on 150. I turned them down a little bit because I went out for a walk for an hour, which I said I wasn't going to do. I said I was staying in, but I needed to go and collect something, so I went out for a walk for an hour and a half. So I turned it down. So it's been in for maybe 3.5 hours, 150 for maybe 2 hours, and then down to 100 while I went out, so it didn't kind of cook too much. I've tasted one and they are delicious, very garlicky if I'm honest, but that's fine. So as you can see, the sauce has thickened up, which I think it's a little bit too thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the meatballs in the jars, and then I'm going to add some of that pork stock and just let the sauce cooking liquid down a little bit, just to thin it down a little bit, and then I'll pour that, heat it up, and then pour it onto the meatballs, and then we'll sterilise the jars. And then I'm going to save some because I'm going to have them for my tea. I've got some fresh pasta that I made. Well, fresh pasta that I dried out. Is that still fresh pasta? I don't know. Which I'm going to have for my tea, and I've got some nice cheese to melt onto the top. Can't remember what the name of the cheese is, but it's a nice and melty one. So that's it. I'll probably add a little bit about once I've put the meatballs in the jars and kind of see what kind of sauce consistency we kind of got it want it down to, because if you're going to have it with pasta, you want it to be able to coat the pasta, where I think that's a little bit too thick to be coating the pasta. So we'll use a little bit of pork top to lay it down. So that's it for now. I'm sure it is. I don't think I need to add anything else. Yeah, that's it. So the last bit of the video about the meatballs. Put the meatballs in the 600ml jars. I did do 4 jars of the meatballs plus the meatballs that I had for tea, so it worked out about 11 or 12 meatballs, because they slightly vary in size and the way that you pack them in the jars. So I did do about 11 meatballs per jar. I did do 4 jars, but I saw my sister yesterday, so I gave her one of the jars as a bit of a present. Because I don't see her that much, so it's just nice to give people things when you see them. Yeah, and then the sauce, and then I had more sauce. So yeah, I did 4 jars, and I also had the like 10 or 11 for my something to eat as well, which seems excessive. It was. I was very full afterwards. And then I had a bit of sauce left over, so I've preserved those as well. Preserving things in jars is pretty straightforward. I've done videos on it before, but we'll quickly recap. So, nice clean jars. The method that I use, you don't need to kind of sterilise them, just need to be clean, because we're going to sterilise them through like a cooking process. So, clean jars, clean lids, contents into the jar, what you want to preserve, and then put the lids on, put the jars in cold water, bring slowly up to the boil, and then simmer for a good 45 minutes, and then you know that everything inside has any kind of bacteria that's inside died. The only things you need to be careful of are putting hot liquids in jars. You just need to be worried about, you can't put hot jars in cold water, otherwise they will crack, in likewise the other way around. So you can't put hot jars in cold water, cold jars in hot water, because of the heat difference with the inside. What it will do is it will smash the glass. So that's pretty straightforward. They will keep for a good 4 months, 6 months, probably even longer, if I'm honest. I wouldn't have no qualms about eating them after 6 months. I'd just smell them to make sure, and there was no mould or anything like that, or the lids hadn't blown. But you can tell when they're properly sealed because there's no movement in the lids there. As you can see, I used the stock from the rendering the pork fat down just to let the sauce down a little bit. So as you can see there, it's just slightly split out the sauce, but that's fine. You can just shake, and then that's all emulsified back together. So I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't think it needs to be more explanatory than that. But yeah, that was what I did with the leftover bits of pork from making bacon. I have done a video on bacon, and I need to do another one this week because it's taken out the brine this week. So that's it for the pork meatballs. Would work with beef or anything else that you want to work them with. But that's it for now.